Now McLaren have won the Constructors Championship, does it mean papaya rules will be relaxed and Lando and Oscar can race each other properly for the final 6 races of the season? Is there any world that we could see Max Verstappen teaming with George Russell next year? And has the 2026 silly season started over a year early? This is On Track, talkSPORT's weekly motorsport show as we look back at the Singapore Grand Prix this past weekend. Not the world's most exciting race, but there's definitely a few talking points to come out of it. One particular large talking point, which seems to be the talking point every single week. We're also going to talk about some success we've seen in the Junior Series in the United Kingdom this weekend. Also some other series ending, British Touring Car crowning their champion as well. And we are going to look ahead to what might happen for the final few races of the Formula One season. I'm John Jackson, joined as ever by Sky Sports F3 commentator, former racing driver himself, Piers. News on Piers getting into a racing car this week will be breaking on this show next week. So you can hint as much as you want, Piers. We know you're getting back in a car. We don't know what car it is. Well, I do, but we're not going to say right now. But it will be very exciting when it happens, right? Is that? Can I say that? Is that as much as I can allude to?
Perfect little teaser there. Lovely.
We are exhausted to start this show off today because we spent the weekend at Donington Park, and Donington Park is quite an intense weekend on a British GT weekend anyway. Then you add into the mix that it's the last race of the week, the last race of the season, and then the weather conditions. We've got Storm Amy going on, so we've got high winds. I've noticed actually since I drove away, my car's got a dent in it because something's been blown into it, so I'm absolutely livid about that. But mainly we had to stand in what is in effect a cold car park all weekend, and we had one extra race as well because the GB4 Championship that we do, along with GB3, had a race that was carried over from Brands Hatch, which was 3 weeks ago or so. So we had an extra race, and then we had 2 champions crowned, one we were expecting, one we weren't expecting, and I mean, I've spent the day in bed. How about you?
I have been working today. My brain capacity has not been at 100%, and if those are listening at home, I might sound a little different to normal. My vocal cords have taken a battering. 7 races where we did the pre-show, the commentary, and then the post-show. And then I think I'm also coming down with a cold, whether that was related to the fact that I was wearing about 15 layers over the weekend due to the freezing cold winds. I don't know, but we'll get through the show, hopefully, and we won't fall asleep by the end.
We will talk about the GB3 and GB4 Championship, and also British F4 touring cars, bit of Porsche Super Cup GB a little bit later on. And I will let you into the world of how Piers works across a race weekend because he doesn't get enough praise for how much he actually does. So forgive his voice this week. You look great there. If you're watching on the talkSPORT Driving YouTube version, you look absolutely fantastic. We actually caught the F1. There was a perfect gap in this crazy weekend where we caught the F1 perfectly, so we could watch the whole race. And we watched it in what I could only describe as a miracle of modern engineering. It's a van that was first released, I believe, in 1999. It's gone through 3 different owners, one of which converted it into kind of like a production van. It's got more plug sockets than my flat. But I mean, it's done nearly 200,000 miles, and you can hear it coming from like 10 minutes away. It was, I mean, you've probably seen this van more than I've seen it before, but we were grateful for this van in the wind, and because it had a very small TV in it, so we could catch the race.
Yeah, well, it was a full weekend of racing for us. Eventually, we did 7 races, and in the only downtime we had on Sunday, we watched the whole Formula One race. So there we go.
Yeah, shout out to Dan who lent us his van. There's a nice little sofa in the back. So we watched the Formula One race, and for George Russell, fantastic weekend for him. Pole position, his second race win of the season. I mean, if there's not a contract already outlined, hopefully he can add a little extra cash onto that because he keeps doing well for Mercedes, and why they haven't snapped him up already, I don't know. Perhaps we'll get onto it and maybe we'll work out whether there is a contract in place and maybe it's just not been released yet. But we have to talk about the incident because we're watching Lando Norris and we're watching Oscar Piastri fight it out for a championship. It will be their maiden championship. And, you know, we saw what happened back in Canada. There was a clash there. We've seen, you know, strategic issues with drivers being put out that we've seen over races recently. And then we've seen them clash again this past weekend. And Oscar Piastri was on the receiving end of that incident. So first of all, let's look back at the Singapore Grand Prix properly by starting with the big incident, and that is that incident between the two McLarens. Was it a racing incident? Was anyone to blame? How do you look back at that, Piers, as a former driver yourself?
Well, I'm going to go with my initial reaction when I saw the incident for the first time and then saw the immediate replay, which was an excellent move from Lando Norris. I mean, I, as a racing driver, if I was coaching a driver at the start of a race, that's exactly what I'd want them to be doing, putting yourself in a position, taking control of the space you have around you. I think he made a slightly overshot turn 3, which caused him to just nudge the back of Verstappen, which ultimately caused the contact with Piastri. I mean, I can understand why Piastri was potentially not the happiest, because you don't want contact between teammates. But actually what Lando did, if he hadn't have clipped the front of or the rear of Verstappen, I don't think there would have been contact anyway. So nothing in my eyes. I think, yes, in theory, racing is motorsport is a non-contact sport, but it was such insignificant contact that the damage on Norris's car wasn't from Piastri. It was from nudging the back of Verstappen. Verstappen barely even noticed. And I mean, ultimately, the rules are if you're ahead or at least alongside at the apex, you have right to do within reason what you want at the exit. And that's what happens. Piastri had, if he wanted to avoid all contact or all chance contact, he could have jumped out of the way. I wouldn't expect him to, and I wouldn't think he would want to, even in hindsight. But no, great move. And this is exactly what we've been saying Norris needs to be better at. His first laps have been notoriously passive, timid. I don't know what adjective you want to use, but the opposite of what we see from the likes of Verstappen, sometimes Leclerc. In fact, we saw from Leclerc, he had a good start as well. So Norris is going out there and learning from his mistakes and trying to take back this championship lead.
I've been looking at a lot of views on this over the last couple of hours or so, and a lot of people are saying that exactly what you've just said there. We've been waiting for Lando to be aggressive on the first lap, and suddenly now it's gone the way of Oscar in Oscar's, to his detriment. It seems like there's a different feeling. It seems like, I guess it would be people have their favourites and they see things differently, and you can't really win with this, and it just creates this muddy water of, can we just enjoy the racing, please? Do we have to have one side? Do we have to go back and refer to other incidents and who's been wronged and who's been in the wrong and who's been fair? And I just want to enjoy the racing. Granted, if this hadn't happened, we wouldn't have a great deal to talk about from the Singapore Grand Prix. It was largely processional. But, I mean, Oscar straight away was fairly angry on the team radio. I mean, it's not fair was the first thing he said that I've got written down here, having listened to the team radio. And, then obviously he gets a response. Then he goes on about how we're just going to be crashing into teammates now. Is that how we're playing this kind of thing? And he's right to feel a little bit aggrieved. But afterwards, he had calmed down a lot. Is that just a kind of heat in the moment, pressure getting to him? You're driving at ridiculous speeds around a track that, it's kind of the OG street circuit where there's no runoff. Tempers are going to flare, and that you would chill out about it later on?
I think maybe last weekend and this weekend are the first two times we've really seen the pressure starting to get to Oscar Piastri. He's normally such a cool character, and on the surface, he's pretty chilled most of the time, especially out of the car. But we saw the mistakes. It's been well documented. We chatted about it, of course, after Azerbaijan. Not a good weekend for him, although could have been worse considering Norris didn't really score many points. But then this weekend again, I think he was definitely flapping on the radio more than... Have we ever heard him that irate on the radio? I don't know if we have, or very infrequently. And it was, I think, in my opinion, it was a sign that he knows that's Norris who's gone through. I think he would have complained on the radio if it hadn't been Norris. If it had been, let's say, Leclerc was the one at the inside, there's a lot of contact. He would have said, guys, you need to have a look at that. There's contact at the apex. He caused a collision. Please refer it to the stewards. But ultimately, the outcome would have been the same. And then he would have had less to whinge about because he knows he can whinge at his team about his teammate. I think he's a pretty calculated guy. I think he calls a spade generally. And I think he will look at the incident after the race, or will have looked at the incident maybe today after he's had some time to reflect. He'll just think, do you know what? That was actually exactly the move, if roles reversed, that I would have pulled on Lando. And if I was Lando, he would have driven away and not given a second thought to giving the position back. And also, I think he, having seen all the angles of the contact and that move on turn 3, I don't think he would have expected the team to give it back, because also roles reversed, he wouldn't be expecting to give that position up if he'd have done that move on Norris. So there's a lot of it is you're in the car, the adrenaline's high, it's hot, it's the hottest race, most physical race of the year. You've got the championship pressure in there. I think he'll come back stronger. I think he now knows that Norris has sort of raised his game a bit and raised he's punchy and is trying to take the championship. I think Piastri will do the same. I think he'll come out and be like, right, this is how we're doing it. It's very much gloves are off, to use a very classic cliche, but there's been contact now. The team haven't done anything about it. I'm not saying that Piastri is going to go and deliberately cause contact, because I don't think that's the way he goes racing from what I've seen of him in the junior Formula and in Formula One. But I think he's now knows that if that's the situation, they're not going to reverse the position. So therefore, he needs to be assertive. I think potentially he could have slightly defended a bit better. Again, I think Norris actually did a very good job to put himself in a position where Piastri didn't have a huge amount to do, but he could have seen it coming maybe and reacted differently.
There's obviously a wall there, which Oscar came very close to. In fact, we were watching some of the drivers coming as Max Verstappen was getting incredibly close to some of those walls there. It just shows you the precision that these drivers drive with. Not really much that Oscar could have done there, but he was also on the receiving end of something that Lando Norris has been on the end of, and that is a sticky wheel on a pit stop. I think Fernando Alonso had a similar issue, or it might have been Lance Stroll, I wasn't entirely sure. But, a bad pit stop there. Lando was given the opportunity to pit first, I think, and rather than, I've just seen a different side of Lando. He was like, yes, I'm going to pit first. Absolutely. Get me in, get me out. Let's go. Rather than kind of worrying too much about strategy, just being quite bullish on the situation. And I think this is going to get us a really good 6 races before the end of the season now. We're going to see a proper fight. We're going to talk more in just a second about what this means for the wider team. Of course, does it overshadow McLaren winning back-to-back Constructors Championships? Because we haven't mentioned that in the first 12 minutes of this show yet, and that is, in effect, the biggest thing that should have come out of this past weekend. We will have a look at some of the other drivers that have impressed us this weekend and some of the drivers for the future. Just to go back briefly on the Oscar Piastri, Lando Norris situation, the race result was George Russell won, Max Verstappen came second, with Lando third and Oscar fourth, Kimi Antonelli coming fifth with a great late move, which we will discuss shortly. But I guess the number one rule was broken this past weekend, and that is don't crash with your teammate. However, when Max Verstappen also kind of gets in the way, you can allow that for Lando Norris. Oscar Piastri wasn't there when they were celebrating on the podium, which I've seen has got a lot of attention, actually. Is it sour grapes? Is he sulking? Now, a few people have looked into this online, and I think it was the race. It may have been someone else reporting from the scene saying, well, Oscar was actually fed through to the media area where you've probably seen it on TV. The drivers go and they have different stations for each broadcaster from each different region, and they'll get taken around by their PR and they'll do their TV interview and then they'll move on. So Oscar had already gone on to that, whereas the impromptu celebrations happened on the podium and Lando happened to still be around. So he got grabbed and he was there on the podium. That's the official line. Do you believe that, Piers? Do you think at the end of the race, Oscar was still livid? There was a clip, and I don't know the authenticity of this, so I'm not going to say it's an absolute fact, but Zach Brown was allegedly talking to him to say congratulations on helping us win the Constructors Championship, and supposedly Oscar Piastri pulled his headset out mid Zach Brown talking. Now, I don't know if that's real. Obviously, someone could have played with that and, taken the timings out of context, but I mean, how would he have been feeling in that moment? And do you believe the story that he was doing his media duties instead of sulking?
Do you know what? I can believe that Piastri unplugged the radio in the car, because I think they can do that. They've got it plugged in their belly or just in the side of the cockpit. And having been a disgruntled racing driver on an in-lap before, not with the radio actually, but having been, that's very much something that I would have done. So that I can believe. I would love it to be, a soap opera, and that Oscar Piastri was being petulant, was like, no, I'm not going to the team celebrations. But I've seen enough drivers that haven't won a race and then begrudgingly go to team celebrations to think that Piastri's big and man enough to have gone to those. I genuinely think that was probably a logistical timing error in terms of him not being on the podium celebrations. But I quite like the fact that Piastri's like, I don't need to hear this right now. Unplug.
I mean, it was a nice message from Zach Brown. It wasn't anything untoward. I'm just getting it up, actually, what he said here. He did post on Instagram, and this would have been, Monday afternoon. Super proud of the whole team and what's been an amazing season. Plenty more fun to be had. Do you think he had any fun on Sunday?
Not loads
play
of fun.
Cards on the plane home. That might have been fun.
I don't think he had a very good plane ride home. That's all I'm saying. It is fun driving a Formula One car. I would love to do it. But for these Formula One drivers, they don't get in the car every weekend for fun. They're competitors. It's effectively like a tennis player's racket or a jockey's horse. It's the actual act of driving the Formula One car isn't the goal of being fun. Yes, they as a sort of a tertiary or, fourth or fifth priority of it, them enjoying actually driving the car, but they are absolute competitors. They're only there to win. Piastri knows he's lost a few more points to Norris in the championship, and he didn't feel like it was fair at the time. Again, I think he'll actually look back at it and think, do you know what? Things played out as they probably should, and maybe he should have done better at the start, but that's what he'll live and learn with.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, he does still have a lead in the championship, 22 points over Lando Norris. Max Verstappen then in third place. It's funny how can Max Verstappen suddenly win the championship out of nowhere? Chat has disappeared quite quickly. And for George Russell, he's on 237 points. So, I mean, he could still catch Max Verstappen if he can keep up this form and Max's results slowly drift back to maybe where the Red Bull car is, but we'll watch this space. But as it comes to the Constructors Championship, McLaren have won back-to-back Constructors Championships, which is a huge accolade for them. It's been a long time since they won last year, and now they've won 2 in a row, 650 points already with 6 races to go. It's a record-equaling position of the season where they've clinched the title. To give you some context, Mercedes are exactly half points behind them in second on 325. So it really has been a dominant season. The issue I've got here is that I've barely heard anything about this. If it wasn't for the fact that Oscar had shared that graphic from their Instagram and a couple of other drivers that are part of the McLaren family have shared it, I've seen no chat about this at all. Is the problem between... Well, not the problem between them. I'm sure they don't have much of a problem, but the battle between Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris, is it kind of overshadowing the team? Because when it comes down to it, the team is the team, and the team should, in theory, come first, no?
I think it is 100% overshadowing the team's championship, but that's because I think the drivers' championship overshadows the team's championship every year. I mean, in the last couple of years, or was it last year or was the year before, wasn't it? It was the year before, wasn't it? Where the drivers' championship was wrapped up, but then Ferrari and Mercedes were going at it. But that was because we kind of had nothing else to talk about. All the drivers' positions were sorted. But the fans, you and I, let's be honest, do we really care who wins the Constructors' Championship? I mean, it's a cool thing to be like, oh yeah, they won, but we actually care about the drivers. We're here for the sport. We want to see drivers going at it 1v1. We've got an amazing championship battle between Lando and Oscar, so I don't mind that we haven't really heard much about it. It's more to do with all the people that work in the teams, so intra-team camaraderie, inter-team battling. But if you don't work for Formula One team, it doesn't make, for me, it doesn't float my goat. I don't watch Formula One on a Sunday to figure out to find out which team is going to take home a bit more money at the end of the year. I watch to see who's going to be the best driver in the world. They're gladiators. They're the people that we go to watch. They're the people that young people aspire to. Of course, there are people that aspire to be engineers and team leaders and such like, but it's a sport. We want to see proper sport, and that's why I think it doesn't get as much attention maybe as it in theory should, considering how much effort goes in behind the scenes. But I don't hate it.
Have you seen any change actually with the whole Drive to Survive movement, which started however many years ago now, and the time you've been driving and also been watching Formula One? Because for me, it feels like more people now who are new fans to the sport will pick a team because they're maybe used to picking like a football team or a sports team if they're from the US. It feels now like I've got more people around me when I'm doing things like GB3, like we were doing this weekend, who support McLaren. I'm a McLaren fan, or I'm a Red Bull fan, I'm a Ferrari fan. There's one girl that I know that's like a staunch Ferrari fan, and she's not Italian or anything like that. She just picked Ferrari, and she's always posting quite funny content about how obviously miserable it is to be a Ferrari fan at the moment. And I don't think that when I was watching Formula One as a kid before the Drive to Survive era, there were particularly many people that would support the teams. They tend to pick the drivers. Not saying we don't see a lot of people supporting drivers as well, because obviously we do. I just feel that maybe the sort of team loyalty is a bit more now. What do you make? Have you noticed anything?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, I'm not speaking on behalf of hoity-toity old motorsport, but I've been around motorsport and in motorsport paddocks since I was a kid. I was literally, there's photos of me hanging off a racing awning when I'm 2 or 3 years old on one of those baby bungees. So I've been in motorsport very much involved for my whole life, and then as a driver through my teenage years and into my early 20s. And it really kicked off with Drive to Survive, and then with COVID and Drive to Survive, the sport has literally, in popularity, has gone through the roof. And that's one thing that I have seen is I think people coming from other sports, they just assume they need a team. Whereas, the people in my inner circle, the people I spoke with in motorsport, they never had a team. They just watched it to watch the sport. And I'm still very much the same. Like, I quite like the way McLaren go racing, but I wouldn't say I'm a McLaren fan. but I used to watch for the sport, to see the race, to watch the drivers do battle. It didn't matter really to me who was winning one week to the next, and to a certain extent it doesn't till today. And the other thing that I've noticed that since Drive to Survive's been a thing is people call it the F1 now. That's come about in the last 5 years. It used to be, do you watch Formula One? Whereas now it's, do you watch the Formula One? Did you watch the Formula One? So that's another funny thing that I've noticed.
It's the difference between people saying the pit lane and people saying pit lane. It's a very Americanism that's come into motorsport. It's also interesting because people don't pick their teams based on geographical regions unless it's a country. So if you're Italian, you probably do support Ferrari. However, you might then support Kimi Antonelli, so you might support Mercedes. You don't have people who live in Surrey going, well, I'm obviously I'm a big McLaren fan because MTC's down the road. Or, there's not a group of Haas fans from Banbury just because it's down the road, I don't think. So like football, like other team sport, it's a little bit different. We've digressed slightly. Does this now mean, to finish this kind of conversation about McLaren, now the Constructors Championship is settled and we have 6 races to go, does the benefit of this mean now that is tied up and they will be a bit more relaxed on the papaya rules and they will let these drivers now battle it out over 6 races to see who wins the championship? Please tell me you think they will.
I think papaya rules, they've set their stall, haven't they? They've made whatever these papaya rules are. I think that it's very much like they keep whatever those rules are to their chest because they don't want the media getting involved. But here we are talking about it anyway. My view is that they're going to stick with it because that's also the way that Andrea Stella and Zach Brown do things. They like, right, let's plan for this. This is where we're going to go racing, and then they stick to it. And they've been pretty good at that. Their consistency is one thing to be admired and I think upheld because they're consistent in the way they apply their internal rules. But I do think they create their own set of problems when they've got their own set of rules for their teammates versus other drivers. And I think we saw that play out this weekend. Great move from Lando. I don't know what their debrief of that move will have been because Lando clearly didn't go into that move intending to make contact and the contact wasn't large and it was clearly deemed fair by the stewards. But if they think that wasn't fair, well then where's the line? Because if I was running a team, I would say the one rule is do not cause damage to your teammate's car. And then everything, other than that is you just drive to the rules, let the stewards decide and we will side with the stewards. Because therefore you're almost relinquishing responsibility to the sport rather than taking on the responsibility of what goes on circuit. So again, I don't run a Formula One team. I never have, probably never will. So therefore there's a lot more that they think about. And they've got employees to think about and marketing and also they want to win championships as a team because that gets a lot of money as well. At the same time, why take on that responsibility? You're only going to make a rod for your own back because then your drivers are going to say, oh, well, you say that you should never make contact. But unfortunately, if you're racing wheel to wheel, contact is eventually inevitable. And we saw that this weekend. And it doesn't always have to be a catastrophic bad thing as we saw this weekend. So yeah, it's a bit of a weird one.
It is. And I mean, it's going to play out beautifully over the next 6 races. Of course, we go to the United States next in a few weeks' time. Been lucky enough to go to Circuit of the Americas. It's an incredible place. I imagine when F1 is on, it's an even bigger spectacle. Then, of course, it's 2 triple headers. I think it's still 2 triple headers, isn't it? Where we have, maybe it's not 2 triple headers. There is a gap in between Mexico and Brazil this time, I think, by the looks of it. Yeah, so United States and Mexico. Mexico is going to be absolutely fantastic. You can imagine that Checo Perez will be there doing some kind of Cadillac activation or something like that before he gets really ready into his pre-season training. Then we have Brazil, Las Vegas, Qatar and Abu Dhabi. 22 points in that battle. It's going to be fascinating to see what happens. So let's take a look at the actual race winner. Someone you've been a huge fan of throughout this season and longer still. George Russell didn't put a foot wrong all weekend in horrendous conditions. We know that Singapore is that racetrack where we see them out the back with the rubber duck in the paddling pool. I think George had, he has to wear, that's the frustrating thing as a racing driver, I'm sure you have to wear your contractual obligated outfits, and obviously you have to wear quite a warm race suit, but he was wearing the ice suit type waistcoat type thing, keeping as cool as possible. And I mean, in these mad conditions, with all this drama going on around him, he drove a great, perfect race and weekend, I'd say.
Yeah, George Russell performing again. I mean, I don't want to say, I've said it a lot this year, but George Russell, I think, given the car, is one of the only drivers I think that would actually be challenging Max Verstappen more often than not to the championship. If, let's say that they all had their own car but all and their own team, but all the cars were equal. I think George and Max will be going for the championship this year. Who knows? Maybe Lando and Oscar will be there or thereabouts, but Max undoubtedly is the one that I think is performing the best this year. But George Russell goes under the radar. I mean, let's not forget he's alongside Kimi Antonelli, who's doing okay, but he finished 33 seconds ahead of Kimi, and Kimi didn't have a bad weekend. I mean, yeah, I know Yuki was down in P, nowhere, 12, a lap down, but we've spoken about that at length. But yeah, Russell does it again. I mean, both of his laps in qualifying were good enough for pole, then didn't put a foot wrong in the race. He's just at that stage in his career where he's got the confidence, he's got the experience, he knows the team, he feels comfortable. There's the whole contractual situation floating about, but clearly it's not putting him off his game.
Now, in an ideal world, I would ask you a very simple question, and that would be, with Red Bull 360 points behind McLaren in the championship, in fourth, having been used to dominating, why aren't they trying to sign George Russell? Because then you've got two great drivers who can win races. You've not got the second driver problem, unless obviously George doesn't get on with the car. But then you have the frosty relationship between Max Verstappen and George Russell. I mean, could it happen? If he is a free agent? Because surely if you're Red Bull, you're sitting there thinking, well, we need to solve this second driver problem immediately. We need to be back on top. We've got Ford coming on as our power unit suppliers next year. How are we going to solve this problem? Sure, Isaac Hadjar can get promoted, but if he's finishing 5th and 6th rather than 11th, 12th, 13th like Yuki, why not? Why are we not going for this driver that can win races? It's a bit similar to why don't you go and get Carlos Sainz to come back last year instead of watching him getting the most out of a Williams but still only finishing halfway through the grid?
Yeah, it's if you use the old Williams analogy of drivers are like light bulbs and it's just unplug one and plug another one in and it's either better or it's worse, then it would make complete sense for Red Bull to just go and nick George Russell while he's currently not completely signed with Mercedes, because then in my opinion, you've got the best driver on the grid and the second best driver on the grid. So therefore, by maths or logic, you would say, well, you're going to have the best chance at winning the World Championship and winning the Constructors Championship. And let's be honest, they need help with that Constructors. You've got a driver mathematically in with a chance of the Constructors Championship, and they're fourth in the standings in the teams, which shows how few points that their second driver has got this season, most of which has been with Yuki Tsunoda. However, the drivers, yes, they are racing machines, but they are also human beings. And only 2 hours a week do they drive or just over 2 hours a week do they drive their car. The rest of the time they are humans in a team, and they have to manage the team environment, and they have to make sure, or the CEO or the team principal has to make sure that the whole thing works together so that the whole team gets the best out of it. And I think if you plugged George Russell in next to Max Verstappen, I mean, one, would Verstappen allow it? I think he would probably kick off, and maybe Jos would as well. Two, if we did have that, first of all, I'd absolutely love that, because I think it would be a box office both on and off circuit. I think they would come to blows fairly quickly because they are performing at a very high level. They're very different characters, but both very strong characters. They both say what they think. They both have had their disagreements on and off circuit in the past. So therefore, I just can't see it happening, because especially with Laurent Mekies now being the team principal, he's a lot more of a nurturing team environment, encouraging, cohesive team leader than I think maybe even Christian was. Christian was a bit more of a, I say an iron fist. That might be unfair, but that sort of level of management where it's like, this is the best thing to do. This is what we're doing. I don't mind if there's a bit of conflict. Lauren, we've heard that he's been a lot more helpful. Yuki's found it helpful that he's been encouraging and compassionate in the right way. And to a certain extent, ever since Lauren's turned up, Yuki's actually been doing slightly better, not good enough in some people's opinion. So I don't think it's going to happen. But, why hasn't Mercedes signed George? For all the things I've said, they know, Toto knows that he's probably the second best, or George will think he's the best, but probably the second best driver in Formula One at the moment. He's banging in results like they're going out of fashion, considering that car more often than not isn't really in its best window. It's a bit of a weird situation, to be honest. I don't really get it. And then there's talk that it's about media obligations and blah 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 blah. But surely you can iron that out if you want to keep hold of George Russell. They're taking a big risk, because in theory that is that Red Bull seat there. And while they might think it's unlikely, George could go, do you know what? I'll go there. They've won championships more recently. There's still a seat at Alpine. I think that's very unlikely he's going to go there. 2 at RB, again, unlikely he's going to go there. But George Russell, Max Verstappen is probably the only driver that could waltz into any team he wants. But George Russell has a lot of pulling power and could probably push aside another driver in a decent team, especially with the regulation changes coming up.
You would imagine that if the son of the owner didn't drive for Aston Martin and they've got Adrian Newey in there, they would be doing everything they possibly can to get George Russell to drive for them, no?
That's a good shout, I mean, I've had a look online. It seems like Lance Stroll and Fernando Alonso are signed up for next year.
Alonso's alluded that if he does have a good season in 2026, he'll probably walk away because he doesn't want to walk away, on a low.
True.
Does George Russell not sign with Mercedes and go, you know what, I'll take a year out and I'll go and drive for them?
George Russell's not going to take a year out. I mean, I like the thought, and it's fun to think about. But he's going to be in F1 next year. I would probably bet my house on that, as barring any injury or unforeseen circumstance.
Okay, I'm going to reword that then.
Go on,
Does he get a 2-year contract on the table from Toto, and he goes, you know what, I'll sign a 1-year contract because you only gave me you've not signed me up for more than 1 year. So why should I be loyal to you? Because at the end of 2026, there could be several options on the table. Lewis Hamilton may not be driving at Ferrari then. There could be that seat if Alonso leaves. I think at the end of 2026 could be more interesting actually than going into 2026.
Do you know what? That's far more plausible. I like that. That sounds tasty, but also very likely because George has only got the information about how good the 26 car is at Mercedes. But if you lock yourself into a 5-year deal at Mercedes and then it turns out Mercedes go the wrong way with the engine and the car, you're looking at least 3 years of nowhere near the front of the grid. And if you're very much locked in, it's a hard pill to swallow. And that's also, as a driver, the higher the risk for you, the more you're going to be asking for. If Toto's trying to lock him in for 5 years, George is going to be saying, well, it's 40 mil a year. For 5 years, we've got a regulation change coming up. I don't know if you're going to be any good. I'm at the prime of my career. And maybe that's part of the issue that we're talking about now. So I think there's definitely options for the end of, I think the silly season 25 into 26 is going to be really, really interesting because there's almost certainly going to be a shake-up. It's unlikely that we're going to see the same order of cars that we're seeing at the moment. And it's unlikely we're going to see the stability that we've had towards the end of this year and maybe even last year as well. So if a driver's in a bad car and they think they're overperforming, they're going to be looking to go to a good car. If a driver's in a good car and they're underperforming, teams are going to want to ship them out. And not many people have got long-term contracts in at the moment. I think a lot of contracts come to especially in the midfield, a lot of contracts come to their end towards the end of next year anyway. So I'm very much looking forward to it. And who knows, maybe that is the reason why this is all going on.
No, I'm not a driver. My best accolade in a kart was that I managed to keep Lucas Di Grassi, the at the time Mahindra Formula E driver, behind me for about 10 metres when he started last and I started second last in a kart race. That's my best accolade as a driver on track. But as a driver, if you hear the words Adrian Newey, would you not be slightly intrigued about the potential of driving for that team? That's where I'm at with it.
Absolutely, no doubt. As much as he is only one man, if you look at the record books over the last 15, 20, well, actually more like 30 years, I think he's won, I can't remember, I did actually know a little while ago, but I forgot the number.
It's multiple drivers and teams world championships.
It's like 30 or something over the last, 30 championships over the last something number of years. And that doesn't happen by accident. He might be very lucky. He's just moved into teams when they've suddenly got good. But if he's the one spearheading projects, he knows what he's doing. There's a new change of regulations that opens up opportunities for innovation and car advantages, because when you get towards the end of a regulation cycle that we're at the moment, all of the loopholes and all of the regulation holes or opportunities have kind of been found out, and those that haven't have copied and then made their own versions. So yes, very much so. That's you're right there. I think Alonso, he said that he might be on the way out. Lance Stroll doesn't look very motivated at the moment, and it will be in, I imagine, that car as long as he wants to be. But I don't know how much longer he wants to be if he's not enjoying life. So I think Aston Martin's going to be a key player in that whole silly season next year as well, based on how they're performing and also where their drivers end up going.
I feel that, to round this off, Mercedes are playing a very risky game, because if they lose George Russell, George Russell could decide not to sign a contract there and he could do something wild like I suggested. Or they could give him a 3-year contract and he says, I don't want a 3-year contract. I'll sign a 1-year contract. Because they're keeping him hanging, knowing that there's no viable option really that he'd want to drive for next year. Okay, so say George says, do you know what, I want a 1-year contract, and then he goes to Aston Martin, for example. Say then Kimi Antonelli doesn't really live up to expectation. At the moment, he's doing pretty well, but long term, he's not going to be a championship winning driver. Who have they got in their driver academy that's really going to be the next in line? Because they could end up in a couple of years with not a very strong driver lineup, even if they've got a relatively decent car.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, if you've got a good car, you've got more pulling power to bring drivers in. But the driver program is not screaming anything at me at the moment. I know they've got a fair few juniors. They've got 2 or 3 in karting and lower level junior single seaters. But in F2, do they have anyone in F2? Off the top of my head, I can't think of anyone they've got in F2. They've got Martinius, not Martinius, Sean.
Well, it's Frederick Vesti, isn't it? I'm not sure if he's still part of that team though.
Fred Vesti's not been in a single seater for a long time. He's been racing sports cars, and it would be a risk for them to take Fred Vesti. Not saying that Fred's not good enough, but having not raced in a single seater in a long time, that is a risk in itself. I think the highest placed driver in the junior program, as I said, is Noah Stromstead, who had an okay season in F3 this year. But if they need a driver for 26 or 27, I don't think he's going to be ready, because he'll only have done another year in F3 and maybe even 1 year in F2. If he absolutely whoops everyone in F2, then that would be great. But that's a risk, and you're completely right. They're playing a risky game. A couple of years ago, I was saying they've played the junior formula and junior program almost perfectly with George Russell. And then they've fast-tracked Kimi Antonelli, risky, and now they've got a hole in their junior program, risky, and then now they haven't even signed George Russell. This all screams high risk to me, and I know maybe Toto's towards the end of his career and he's going, bang, boom or bust. I'm out in 3 years' time anyway. Let's see if we can squeeze everything out of it. But it seems like they're building a slight house of cards here, and it doesn't scream safety and consistency to me like we've seen McLaren build in the last 2 or 3 or 4 years.
Following the F1 Singapore Grand Prix, there's a few things that we need to tidy up, and that relates to the junior system, because Alex Dunne, who we saw racing in GB3 a couple of years ago, he's then moved all the way up to F2, and he's shown some real promise there and shown he's got a very aggressive driving style, made a few friends and a few enemies along the way. He's decided to leave the McLaren Young Driver Programme. They announced a mutual split last week, which we mentioned on this show, and the rumours are that he's going to sign for another young driver academy with an F1 team. And looking at it, it's going to be Red Bull, surely. There were rumours that Helmut Marko's a big fan of Alex Dunne. He likes his aggressive style. And when you look at the lineup, actually, if you look at the situation, if you're Alex Dunne, you're with McLaren, fantastic. They've got 2 drivers battling out for the championship at the moment. Doesn't look like, unless there's an almighty fallout between Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, it doesn't really look like there's a route to an F1 seat there. So this does make sense. Red Bull have 4 cars on the grid, so there's instantly a double chance of you getting a seat in a car on that grid. And given that they've got Yuki Tsunoda, who's not performing, it's expected that Isaac Hadjar will be stepping up next season. Then got 2 seats on the grid there, and it could be a 3-way fight between Liam Lawson and Alex Dunne himself, and then another young driver from the Red Bull Young Driver Academy. So it makes sense. He'll probably be driving in F1 next year, won't he?
I think there's a chance he'll be driving in F1 next year, but I think that a lot of people maybe are putting 2 and 2 together and jumping to 7. I don't know, because of course we had those comments by Helmut Marko earlier in the year after Dunne was showing promise in F2, good speed, good aggression, a few mistakes, but okay. And then he did a couple of impressive FP1s. Helmut Marko praised him, but let's not forget there's a seat still, in theory, available at Alpine, who is currently that seat's currently basically being managed by a guy cut from a similar cloth of Helmut Marko, of Flavio Briatore, an equally divisive, decisive, and controversial character who likes a driver that fights, who likes a young talent who gets stuck in, and that's very much Alex Dunne. And that second Alpine car hasn't scored any points this year, has it? Let's be honest. Jack Doohan and Franco Colapinto both pointless this year, both figuratively and literally in some regards. And maybe they want a young upstart who's got something about them. Flavio Briatore manages Fernando Alonso, brought him was involved in bringing him to Formula One when he was a young driver. We know he's a very fiery character, and maybe Briatore wants to kind of replicate that with the young Irishman who's got a similar sort of outlook on racing.
It could be a good point. I take that point on board. It's probably going to have a bit of a way on sponsorship, money coming in. Alex Dunne is someone that we've kind of talked about before that, has needed help along the way. He doesn't have a huge backer behind him. Obviously, being part of a young driver academy is a huge deal there because they cover a lot of the costs. But Franco Colapinto reportedly brings in quite a lot of money from South America, as well as a lot of fans as well. So you have to look at that. But I guess, given that, Pierre Gasly has scored 20 times more points than the second car because he scored 20 and they've scored 0 between them. I guess at some point you do have to look at the performance on the track and go, well, look, we're going to actually make more money by being further up the final standings when it comes to the end of the season. So it's a possibility. If he does go to Red Bull, though, do you think that would be another season in F2 with a view to 2027? Because you've got Arvid Lindblad, who, I've heard rumours is a dead cert to be driving for Racing Bulls next year. And it looks like Liam Lawson's really found himself a home at Racing Bulls after the fiasco when he was at Red Bull. So you wouldn't get rid of him straight away, leaving no seat available for Alex Dunne there. So it might be spend a year in our F2 Young Driver Academy, but we're going to have a seat for you probably more likely in 2027 rather than being at McLaren, where unfortunately he's fallen foul of them being so dominant at the moment.
It's a bit of a weird one. Although I'm going to call you out on something there, John. You said that Gasly's got 20 times more points than Dunne and Colapinto. 20 times 0 is still 0, John. So maybe you want to touch up on some maths. But anyway,
you know what I mean.
Yeah, of course. But go back to the situation. We've spoken about the Red Bull Junior program this year in other episodes, so we won't drag that back up again. I've been fairly critical that they've kind of spread themselves very thin and haven't really got a very structured route. So therefore, if they then promote Alex Dunne into the Racing Bull alongside, let's say, Arvid Lindblad, it kind of makes a mockery of all the 75 people they've got on the Red Bull Junior program. If it kind of is pointless doing that, which again adds a bit of strength to my thought that maybe he's going to Alpine. But at the same time, your suggestion that maybe he becomes part of the Red Bull Junior program in F2 next year to allow Lindblad to go alongside, for example, Lawson, maybe. I mean, who knows what happens with that second Red Bull seat? There's a lot of jumbling probably going to go on there, unpredictability. But that would allow Dunne to iron out the mistakes he's made this year in F2, go for a genuine championship bid. I mean, he's still technically in the championship, I think, going forward, but he's a little way off the ultimate lead. Too many mistakes, too many DNFs. He could dominate F2 next year if he has anywhere near the pace without the issues in a Red Bull branded car, and when there would then be a dead cert for the Racing Bull seat in 2027. So that is, I think, that would be a good move, I think, for all round. I think that would be good for the Red Bull Junior program. I think that would be good for Alex Dunne. I don't think he's quite ready for Formula One at the moment, and especially as we've seen drivers fast-tracked into Formula One recently, and it's maybe not gone quite so well, especially in the Red Bull awning, area with the RB and the Red Bull car. It would be good to give Dunne another year to really hone his skills and feel like he's like, no, I need to get an F1 next year, rather than, F1's an option, but I don't know whether I've got the experience. So yeah, I like the idea of that.
Both options on the table. It's that tricky situation of it's been my dream to be an F1 and I could be an F1 next year with Alpine. And on the other hand, we know that that's quite a tricky situation and they're not afraid to make a change. So maybe actually being in Red Bull has more longevity. So you have to kind of weigh that up. And I guess as a young driver, you have people around you which will help you with that decision. But, Alex is
just going to jump in there, John. You're completely right. And I think that's not to be overstated. A driver like Alex Dunne, who hasn't come from a bottomless pit of money. Clearly, he's had some funding to get his career off the ground, but he's not, he can't just buy his way into F2 indefinitely. If you get an opportunity at Formula One, let's say he was offered a seat with RB or maybe a seat in RB in 27 or a guaranteed seat in Alpine next year, it's hard to turn down a guaranteed seat in Formula One when your whole career has been angling towards that, even if it is in theory a potentially worse option, because, a bird in the hand is better than two in the bush. So, a seat in Formula One is better than a better seat and it may be a better seat in a year and a half's time.
And if he does get that seat at Alpine next year, I fear for like other young drivers in their program. Paul Aaron, for example, is he going to become the next Felipe Drugovich, who was a hot prospect but never really found the timing right for him, because he's been the reserve driver for there, and he must have been thinking, well, if Colapinto doesn't come up good, then I'm probably next in line. And then obviously to bring someone in from someone else's driver academy must be pretty frustrating for him. Anyway, loads that we could talk about this on. We'll leave it there for now. There's another young Irish driver that's part of the Red Bull program that looks like he's got a great path to Formula One if he continues to perform, and that is Fionn McLaughlin, who won the British F4 Championship yesterday and was announced straight away to be stepping up into FIA F3 with high-tech TGR next season. That's quite a step up, isn't it, from British F4 all the way to the FIA F3 level without doing like a regional F3 series?
That's a massive step. And my initial thought with that, I've seen Fionn McLaughlin in karts, was very, very strong as a young kart racer. Really like the way he goes about racing, very methodical, very fast. First year in cars, won British F4, very impressive with the Red Bull backing. That's a lot of pressure, and he's clearly shown that he can do that. But to go from British F4, so, you know, a competitive F4 grid, granted, but not one of the biggest. I think German and Italian are looking at the grids, potentially slightly more competitive and a bit more difficult. To go from British F4 to FIA F3 without a Formula Region in the middle, that's tough. Like, I don't expect him to hit the ground running, and that's no disrespect to Finn. I think he's a great driver and has the capability to go all the way. But we've seen the last couple of years, I mean, this year, Rafa Kamara set records, amazing pace, you know, dominated the championship in F3. And he actually did 2 years in Formula Regional Europe. 2 years. He came, I think it was at 6th or 3rd in his first year, and then came back and dominated Formula Regional, then has dominated Formula 3, and was an older driver at 20 years old. Fionn McLaughlin, is he still 15? I think he's still 15, isn't he? Or he's only just turned, he's either 15 or just turned 16. To join Formula 3 at 16. I mean, Nikola Solov was pushing Kamara this year, and it was his 3rd year in F3, and he's only 18 years old. He struggled in his first year when he was 16. So it's make or break for Finn next year. But it's exciting to see that the Red Bull are actually getting behind a driver and promoting them, because I think they do need to be a bit more decisive rather than, as I've said before, spread themselves so thin.
Yeah, for sure. Another driver that did well this past weekend, we were covering it, GB3. In fact, let's just talk about GB4. First of all, Ari Bansol won the championship there. It was a three-way fight right until the very last race, which was fantastic to see. A great season for Ari and also his teammate, Elite Motorsport. Elite Motorsport getting their first single-seater championship. If you know British racing, you'll know they've been around for a decade or so, and that was their first British Drivers' Championship. So huge shout-out to Eddie Ives and the team there. Also, Ava Dobson got the top female performing in the championship, which means she gets a €50,000 prize to go towards the season in F1 Academy. So we may see the Georgia native Ava Dobson driving in F1 Academy next season. That is her plan. And also Alex Ninovich, the new GB3 champion. He's dominated this season. He's won the GB3 championship with a whole round at Monza to go. So he's got 3 races now just to enjoy driving at one of the most iconic circuits in the world. Backed by Rodin, he's been driving with Rodin Motorsports in GB3, and I believe he probably drove with Rodin last season in F4 as well. However, their F3 lineup is complete, so it's going to be interesting to see where he steps up to. I know FIA F3 is his plan. Given that there's no seat at Rodin very quickly, Piers, do you have an inkling as to where he may end up?
No, actually, there's been so many drivers signing up recently in the last 2 or 3 weeks since the F3 season concluded that I've not been actually completely on the ball. So I know that a lot of the teams are full. There's still a few seats to be publicly decided. But it makes sense for me to Ninovich to go to F3, and I think the world would be amiss without an Alex Ninovich in an F3 car next year because of his performances this year in GB3. He deserves a seat.
Absolutely. Well, High-Tech's full, Rodin's full. I don't know about Trident. I know they've got Freddie Slater. They may be full as well. So, yeah, it's going to be an interesting one for him. We've kind of run out of time. I wanted to talk a little bit about Tom Ingram winning his second British Touring Car Championship title. However, we will talk about that next week on the show. Also, Andrew Rackshaw is going to be on the show very soon, hopefully next week, a South African driver who tied up the British Porsche Carrera Cup GB, not British. Well, I suppose it is British, but GB, you know what I mean. He won the title by 2 points. Really exciting finale on that British Touring Car Championship weekend as well. So we will chat to him soon. And we will look forward to the next race in Formula One. Of course, Circuit of the Americas in Texas. Everything's bigger and better in Texas, which means Lando and Oscar will probably have a bigger incident, which we'll talk about. Thank you very much, Piers. We'll see you in a couple of weeks' time, and keep an eye out on the talkSPORT Driving YouTube channel for something that Piers Pryor is doing this week. Do you want to give any more clues, Piers?
I used to drive cars. I don't get the opportunities to do it much these days. Maybe I'll be driving something fast.
Okay, talkSPORT Driving YouTube channel. Make sure you hit subscribe and you will get a video notification just as soon as that mysterious thing that Piers alluded to drops on the channel. We'll see you next Tuesday from 2 p.m. on talkSPORT 2.